All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this exciting event, this exciting talk by Dr. Ana Celia Zentella, entitled Bilingual California, California Bilingüe, Fronteras y Futuros. My name is Mark Bilingual, and I'm professor of applied linguistics at UC Santa Cruz. And these are my colleagues and collaborators. Ji-Yoon Kim, professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at UCLA. And Justin Davison, professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at UC Berkeley. I would like to start this evening with our land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswas-speaking UP tribe. The Ama Mutsun tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. Thank you. So this event is presented by the Humanities Institute at UC Santa Cruz, and co-sponsors include the Bilingualism Research Lab, the Comparative Language Science Project, and the Department of Languages and Applied Linguistics. Today's talk is part of a larger project funded by a UC Multi-Campus Research Programs and Initiatives grant, which aims to enhance the research capacity of the University of California to address the linguistic issues of language contact, language shift, and language maintenance in the Spanish-speaking population of California. One of our main research objectives is the creation of a large open source corpus of Spanish and English in California based on a community approach to data collection. I also invite you to our first symposium on Spanish-English bilingualism in California, which will take place on our campus tomorrow. Just in terms of logistics, I would like to point out that you probably have note cards, and I would ask if you have any questions for Ana Celia for the end of the talk. We'll have our Q&A period. Please write down your questions and raise your hand, and the note card will be picked up by someone, and we'll bring it forward for those questions at the end of the talk. So thank you very much for attending this talk, for being here this Friday evening. And I would like now to introduce our Dean of Humanities, Jasmine Allender.
Good evening. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome you to this keynote lecture of the first symposium on Spanish-English bilingualism in California. As Mark just said, I'm Jasmine Allender. It's my honor to serve as Dean of the Humanities Division, and I'm also a professor of history. This event brings together all of us, including many of the leading scholars, to share research and exchange ideas about one of the most pressing and fascinating issues in contemporary California. The keynote and symposium, as Mark said, are part of a larger project made possible in part by the University of California Office of the President Multi-Campus Research Programs and Initiatives Grant. You don't know how hard it is for someone at UCSC not to use acronyms. Or in other words, a UCOP MRPI. It was awarded to Mark Bilingual and his co-PIs, who you just met. Mark is also our chair, department chair of languages and applied linguistics, and I think they came up here, but we didn't really get a chance to congratulate them, so please join me in a round of applause for them. Their work really offers a crucial step forward in the larger project of recognizing the diverse communities of Spanish-English bilinguals in California. Mark also mentioned the other co-sponsors for the event, and I want to specifically call out the Humanities Institute. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the Humanities Institute, housed in the Humanities Division. THI serves as a hub for humanities research, student success, and community engagement. We just launched our theme for this year. It is humanity. Hopefully that sounds relevant to some of you. And I really hope you will join us, not just for this event, but many others that we have scheduled throughout this anniversary year. It's also no accident that this event is taking place not only in the state, but on the UCSC campus. As you know, and as I think Mark mentioned too, according to the US Census Bureau, California is the state with the largest number of Spanish speakers in the United States, representing close to 40% of the state's population. UCSC is also designated as a Hispanic Serving Institution, or HSI, with close to 28% of our fall 2023 undergraduates identifying as Latinx or Latina. Of the 600 HSIs, 172 are in California alone, including 5 UCs, with 4 others in the emerging HSI category. UC Santa Cruz is also an HSRI, or a member of the Alliance of Hispanic Serving Research Institutions. That's an alliance of 22 leading research universities who are designated as HSIs with the goal by 2030, 6 short years, to double the number of Hispanic doctoral students enrolled at our universities and increase the Hispanic professoriate by 20%. So while today we seek to better understand and support bilingualism, not long ago, there were people who believed that exposing children to more than one language could confuse them, resulting in delays in their language development and possibly even speech disorders. Before I came to Santa Cruz, I experienced the power of bilingual education as a parent who sent her 2 children to a dual language Spanish-English public elementary school in Wisconsin, where students from both Spanish-dominant households and English-dominant households learned from one another. And I really saw how bilingualism can enrich the learning of all students. I also recognize that continuing bias against bilingualism creates harm, particularly for immigrant families, a harm that can end up in bias that warps educational policy. I'm extremely proud of our faculty who are doing such important work in this field, and also proud that they've been able to engage undergraduate students in this research. Through a Mellon-funded initiative that we call Employing Humanities, we've been able to bring humanities undergraduates onto our project teams as paid researchers who work closely with our faculty, including Mark Amengual, who mentored 8 UCSC undergraduate researchers in his bilingualism research lab to work on the multilingual Hispanic speech in California corpus. Any of you here this evening? This project has helped establish our campus as a leader in producing new knowledge about important issues such as language contact, language shift, and language maintenance. So I want to just thank you all one more time for attending this evening. I'm looking forward to the keynote lecture tonight and welcome those of you joining us here at UC Santa Cruz. I'm going to turn things back over to Mark to introduce our esteemed speaker.
It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Ana Celia Zentella, Professor Emerita at the University of California, San Diego, and Hunter College, is an anthropolitical linguist recognized for her research on U.S. Latino languages, language socialization, Spanglish, and English-only laws. Her very influential book, Growing Up Bilingual, Puerto Rican Children in New York, was actually the first book I ever read in grad school. And Ana Celia Zentella mentioned people read books at that time. And I did. And it was hugely influential. This book won the book prize of the British Association of Applied Linguistics, and also the book award from the Association of Latina and Latino Anthropologists of the American Anthropology Association. Her edited collection, Building on Strength, Language and Literacy in Latino Families and Communities, is a popular text in the USA and in Europe. Ana Celia Zentella has also written 2 books with undergraduate students. One at UC San Diego, entitled Multilingual San Diego, Portraits of Language Loss and Revitalization, and the other one with undergraduate students at Swarthmore College, entitled Multilingual Philadelphia, Portraits of Language and Social Change. Also, it's relevant to mention that one of the major sociolinguistic studies, Spanish in New York, Language Contact, Dialectal Leveling, and Structural Continuity, was also published by Ana Celia with her co-author, Ricardo Otegui. In 1996, Manhattan Borough President Ruth Messinger declared October 30th Dr. Ana Celia Zentella Day. So we're rapidly approaching this very special day, which we will celebrate, for her leading role in building appreciation for language diversity and respect for language rights. In 2014, the Latin American Studies Association's Latino section honored Zentella as Public Intellectual of the Year. In 2016, she received the award for public outreach and community service from the Society for Linguistic Anthropology. And Professor Zentella was inducted into the Distinguished Career Award from the Association of Latino and Latinx Anthropologists at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2023. So please join me in giving a heart welcome from Santa Cruz to Dr. Ana Celia Zentella.
Buenas tardes. How is everybody? I asked Mark if I could, in fact, give a salsa lesson instead of giving the talk to be livelier, and he said no. Desafortunadamente. I want to begin. Primero le doy las gracias a Mark y a Jean y a Justin, que son los del comité que han organizado este simposio. Y los felicito por esta tremenda labor. Me siento muy honrada que me han invitado a dar la conferencia inaugural. Y en particular también le doy las gracias a los que dieron los fondos, los chavos, como dicen en Puerto Rico, para esto. I thank especially Jessica Guild, whose name we're turning to gold, because of her tremendous help with details and her patience. Gracias, Jessica. I'm anxious to learn from all of you tomorrow, the many presentations that are going to be given all day long. I look forward to that. I also look forward to hearing from you tonight about your comments and your questions about what I'm going to present, and any suggestions you have. I'll be talking in English, and sorry you won't be able to hear some of the clips of the speakers in the way they spoke, which is much more interesting than my quoting. And sorry for one disturbing song that I'll be playing. Bueno, pero basta ya. Vamos a empezar. So, the Latino population of the United States, as the Dean noted, is around 64 million, and we're the nation's largest minority, 19% of the total population. California is the state with the largest number of Latinos in the US, approximately 40% of the state's population. Spanish was the administrative language of California for 300 years, from 1542 to 1848. So the long history of Spanish in California and its large number of Spanish speakers suggest that the continuity of the language and bilingualism are ensured. Many different countries are here represented, but 80% are of Mexican background, while 6 other groups have more than 100,000 residents. They are Salvadorans, Nicaraguans, Hondureños, Peruanos, and Colombianos. All cross many political, economic, racial, and linguistic fronteras to arrive, survive, and thrive in California. But the bilingual future of these immigrants and their children and grandchildren is impeded by multiple barreras beyond the concrete walls at the border. Bilingualism in California is threatened, and we must do everything we can to ensure its future. In the first 10 years of this century, the Latino population in the US grew by 43%, and in 2003, Hispanics, as the government refers to us, were officially declared the largest minority group. But it is projected that the white, alone, non-Hispanic population will not be in the majority by 2045. And those who study the main factors that precede and civil wars predict the possibility of armed conflicts in many parts of the US. The manifesto of the gunman who massacred 22 people, mainly Mexicans, at an El Paso Walmart in 2019 declared that he was motivated by, quote, cultural and ethnic replacement that a Hispanic invasion, end quote, represented. Clearly, those who feel threatened react with anti-immigrant controls, including exclusion, deportation, incarceration, and violence, and hate, as is evident in the recent anti-Haitian hysteria. The future of bilingualism is affected because it involves the damaging racialization of Spanish and all languages other than English. Bonnie Urcholi, a linguistic anthropologist, has explained how and why race has been remapped onto language. Especially after civil rights gains made it politically incorrect to voice venomous stereotypes about race or ethnicity, at least not in public with the microphone on. Negative comments about language became disguised ways of making those negative thoughts being negative. In other words, instead of disparaging what certain groups look like, you criticize what and how they speak. And talking disparagingly about someone's ways of speaking can be more insidious than denouncing their race, because no one is expected to change or lose their race the way they are expected to change or lose their accent or languages. And believers must, and the dominant group believes that speakers who do this must pay a price. So they demand that English be the only official language. So calls for English as the official language, as the misspelled sign points out, build upon a long history of linguistic intolerance. One of the first English words learned by many Native Americans confined to boarding schools was soap, because their mouths were washed out with soap if they spoke their languages. Enslaved Africans were not only forcibly denied the right to speak their languages, they also were not allowed to learn to read or write English. As Barron points out, the English language has become a badge of American identity. Anything less than fluency is perceived as a threat to national security and national identity. Many of us know immigrants who were hit by teachers if they spoke Spanish in schools in the United States. Demands for English only have increased as minority groups increased. So English is the official language of 31 states, including California. 7 other languages other than English are spoken at home in the US by more than 1 million people each. Spanish, of course, but Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Arabic, French, and Korean. Still, 28 states only allow English as their official language. 3 make exceptions: Alaska, South Dakota, Hawaii. California had its official language declared in 1986. Today in Congress, the English Language Unity Act proposed in 21, which would establish English as the official language of the entire US, is still pending. And I want to play a song with the help of the wonderful tech genius. A song with a refrain that became popular when Oklahoma passed the last official English law.
Hey, I can't read that sign out there. Please tell me what's it say. We have to have subtitles in 5 languages these days. Now we don't ask too much to share this land of liberties. But if it's not too much to ask, could you please speak English? English is my language, it's the language of this land. And every sign that's posted here I should understand. I do not live in China, Mexico, no foreign place. And English is the language of these United States.
I will spare you the rest of this song, but I wanted to show it to you because I wanted you to note the iconic American symbols linked to English only. You certainly saw the flag, the Statue of Liberty, the Army, and the blonde. Is the survival of English being threatened? In fact, most Latinos speak English, and in fact, 91% of the US born and 38% of the immigrants are proficient English speakers, and the numbers keep growing. But despite our English skills, Spanish speakers have become a major target, encouraged by political leaders' insults. When Newt Gingrich, a Republican from Georgia, was Speaker of the House in '95, he denounced Spanish-English bilingual education, saying it taught the language of living in the ghetto. In 2015, presidential candidate Trump insisted this is a country where we speak English, not Spanish, and he used mock Spanish to label all Latinos bad hombres. Among his other insults, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. It's tempting to blame Trump for today's alarming anti-immigrant fever, especially since it is a fact that hate groups surged during the Trump candidacy and presidency to an all-time high in the United States. And in the 3 weeks after he was elected, anti-Latino hate crime increased 176% in major US cities. Latinos, of course, were not the only target. There were also anti-Black and anti-Muslim incidents. Throughout US history, animosity towards newcomers tends to surge amid fears of economic downturns and war, especially when immigrants are viewed as responsible for the browning of America. I will not play this video for you of students in Covina, California, and in the Midwest, and in 300 other places who were heard yelling, "Send them back, build the wall," ventriloquizing Trump's anti-immigrant slurs. In Los Angeles, anti-Latino crimes have been climbing drastically, and some attackers highlight Spanish as the problem, as in the attacker on the right, who made this demand: "Return to your country, you can't even speak English," before striking a Latino who was defending himself in the head with a wrench. Now, aggression against Spanish speakers has been documented in many states from east to west, including Hawaii. In New York, in a New York deli, a lawyer yelled, "If they have the balls to come here and live off of my money, I pay for their welfare, I pay for their ability to be here, the least they can do is speak English." About 40% of all Latinos have experienced some form of harassment, including verbal aggression, for speaking Spanish. I was once told in a supermarket to speak English by a cashier because I was talking to another worker in Spanish. You don't want to know what I said to them. And at UC San Diego, a chemistry lecturer was videoed in class in 2022, and he was caught when he interrupted his class to shush some workers outside saying, "Sí, sí, señor, ándale, ándale, arriba, arriba." And after asking his students, how do you say quiet in Mexican? He says to the students, "Someone tell me if they start running in here with their weapons." This lecturer was suspended, and he was later apologized. He was reinstated in 2023, and he is teaching this quarter. But non-Spanish speakers are not the only problem. We must ask ourselves, are we complicit? Because Bourdieu reminds us that the language of authority never governs without the collaboration of those it governs. And this is facilitated especially by misrecognition. And the many Latino ways of speaking that are misrecognized by all, including Latinos, are our standard and non-standard varieties of Spanish from many countries, the English of our barrios, and our code switching. Even respected organizations such as the Royal Academy of the Spanish Language repeatedly linked Spanglish, which has become like a dirty word, to, quote, alingualism, ghetto status, and marginalization, end quote. And their official dictionary defined Spanglish as deforming, but fortunately, Professor Jose del Valle and I initiated a campaign to eliminate deforming from that definition, which they did, although the dictionary definition remains incomplete and incorrect. Intense experiences with misrecognition of their bilingualism are part of daily life for the more than 2.5 million people who cross into San Diego from Tijuana every month. And some 45% of the 30,000 who cross daily on foot are students. I interviewed 79 students, half male and female, who had spent between 2 to 16 years of crossing La Línea. La Línea is the line that divided their lives and divided the languages that they identified with in their lives. Transfronterizos learn English, but for many it's a painful process because they've been punished by educators for speaking Spanish, mocked by Anglos because of their accented English, and even dismissed by other Mexicans as an ignorant pollo because of their lack of Spanish. A pollo is someone who pays a smuggler to get them across the border. I also interviewed 43 high school students at Border High and hung out with them at their lovely new school, where the students are maligned mainly because they are poor. 60% live 200% below the poverty level. It's assumed they're going to a dangerous ghetto school. Neighbors and friends think, well, you're going to get shot, one of them says, when they find they're going there. They are often mistaken as a homogeneous group even by their school administrators, teachers, and counselors. In fact, I found that they belonged to 19 different networks based on their skin color, clothes, jewelry, haircuts, music, and ways of speaking Spanish and English. And those identities led them to taunt each other and to label each other nacos, sociales, pochos, mochos. Some students seem to act like la migra bilingüe. La migra is the popular term for the Border Patrol police. Their feared van is barely visible here on the other side of the fence at Tijuana. But those are the police who keep out the feared, the unwanted ilegales. Those who belong to la migra bilingüe insult weak Mexican-American Spanish speakers and label them as pochos who speak mocho. They call the wannabe non-standard English speakers, who seem to them to be gangster types, as cholos. They label the non-standard Spanish-dominant, uncool, lower-class students as nacos, which I find is the N-word in this neighborhood. And the better-off standard Spanish speakers are known as sociales or fresas in Mexico. Because almost all transfronterizos switch themselves, they have been called pocho or pocha, even as they denounce that practice the way this young woman did when she said, pochos are people who speak Spanish and English together y no deben hablar así. That's supposed to get a better laugh than Están dormidos. Okay. Y esto va a ser más aburrido todavía. Okay. The fact is that most Latinos in the US speak Spanglish sometimes. The least likely group, it's hard to see these bar graphs, but yeah, you can see them in when this is sent out as a recording. But the least likely group to speak Spanglish is the third generation or the beyond them, because they don't know enough Spanish to be able to switch. But for example, the elementary school children of the Puerto Rican bloque in New York that I studied switched over 1,600 times at syntactic boundaries that honored the structure of both Spanish and English. And they did this to accomplish over 24 discourse strategies. They proved that Spanglish is a rule-governed, in-group, and informal style of speaking, an act of doing being bilingual. It consists of adapted and unadapted English loanwords inserted in Spanish, of calques and switches between Spanish and English that can be both intra and intersentential. It is a graphic way of saying, as one of the children did, we speak both because we are both. Here is a male transfronterizo who had been crossing for 4 years, and he's explaining Spanglish in Spanglish. Yo pienso que es como el siguiente paso. Es como like, I did that right now. Es como like, it's something you don't even realize, like you talk in English and Spanglish, Hay mucha gente piensa que es como una mutilación del lenguaje, pero para mí no es así. Para mí es como un tipo de metamorfosis que le pasa a la lengua. And here is a poet born and raised in LA who decries the puristas who criticize her way of speaking. And I do hope you will look up the entire poem because it's much longer and very cool, by Olga Angelina Garcia Echevarria, Lingualistic Algo. I'll just read some parts of it. ¿Qué quieren conmigo los puristas? All tongue-tied and sitting proper behind fat stoic dictionaries. I've already eaten the thin white skeletons of foreign words, choked on the bones of Inglés only, learned the art of speaking in codes and code switching, learned to spit palabras out of boca abierta, like bullets, like fire, like fuego, like poems. Aquí se le echa de todo, East lost attitude. Chile chipotle, Chicana power fist. Aquí el inglés se quita sus moños, wears khaki guangos, and dances slow motion to oldies. Los académicos me ignoran, los puristas dicen que contamino, Webster y el pequeño Larousse no me conocen, y Random House me escupe. No manchen. It's a great poem. You gotta look it up. Clearly, Olga believes that her Mexican Spanish is crucial to her identity. But other Latinos, mainly English-dominant members of the third generation, say that their Latino, by the way, you're catching the ooh, I'll talk about that later, does not require Spanish because they are the most likely to speak it less. For Mexican transfronterizos, non-fluent Spanish speakers, non-fluent Spanish defines you as a Mexican-American, usually a pocho, despite el nopal en la cara. And as she says at the end, straight out Mexican, no, I would say Mexican-American. It varies so much if they don't know the language. I don't think they can claim themselves as Mexican. Not surprisingly, a 2023 study found that the majority of US-born can speak, hold a conversation in Spanish, but that's true for only 1/3 of the third generation or higher who can carry on a conversation. And more important is the fact that about half, more than half, of all who say they cannot speak Spanish well have been put down by other Latinos. 54% say another Latino has made them feel bad for it. The majority of those under 50 with some college credit have been criticized. It may be because they have tried to speak it more than the older and less educated US-born Latinos, but even 47% of those with less education have been criticized. These are items that need to be investigated more and in depth. But clearly, these bad feelings of being criticized, not only by the outsiders, but by your own family and friends, have a great impact on children trying to learn. And we know that they feel pressure to fit in, as this 15-year-old explained to her mom, to be like the other kids. Their Spanish can be viewed as a problem, and their English is viewed as a problem too. The impact on the children of El Bloque in New York's barrio was clear. When I began in 1980, 99% of the children were bilingual. 13 years later, only 6% of the 63 children were bilingual. I wonder whether or not the sureñas and norteña homegirls in Northern California that Norma Mendoza wrote about in 2008 have raised bilingual children. You think so? I don't know. And I imagine everyone here knows children who cannot speak to their abuelas or abuelos in Spanish. These issues are important to me because the two immigrants who brought me into this world and to this podium raised proud bilingual and bidialectal children. You might call me a Mexican, but I prefer Chica Rica. Mami y papi did not leave us an apartment, a large bank account, or even a car. But their linguistic skills were the greatest gift we could ever have been left. I wondered then if today's parents in Southern California, who must worry about legal status, rent, cars, jobs, deportation, are they raising their children bilingually? I asked 94 parents. Almost 1/2 were born in Mexico, but 1/3 were born in the US, and there were Puerto Ricans in the group. 86% had lived here for more than 20 years. So this is not a group of newcomers. We need to ask many more different people. More than 3/4 of these interviewed were women. So we also need to ask parents who were men. And most of them were between 36 and 65 years old. More than half of the 134 children they have were between 11 and 25 years old. But another 44% were older, older than 26. Most of the parents spoke fluent English, they said. Only 1/4 of them said their English was poor. And that's, of course, because they'd been here so long. And almost 100% said it was very important to them that their children learn Spanish. Why did they choose it was very important? Mainly those related to speaking Spanish to maintain cultural and familial ties so they could talk with their family, so they could raise bilingual children and develop a bilingual brain. 21 of them offered an extra reason that was better job opportunities. And 5 said they wanted their children to speak Spanish so that they could help others. Only 2 parents said it didn't matter much to them if their children learned Spanish because, in their view, English was too critical for jobs, for prestige, to avoid stigma. And if the kids don't want to learn, they won't force them. And when a father, or rather a husband in the household did not speak Spanish, it wasn't necessary. When asked if their children mixed Spanish and English, 16% said they never did, but the majority, 59%, said they mixed poco, and another 26% said those children mixed mucho. Most interesting was the fact that 3/4 of the parents did not criticize their children for mixing languages. Now, these are answers to questions. You have to observe families at home and on the street to see if this carries out, if in fact is true. They said they didn't criticize because, most popular reason, they knew that their children lived in both worlds and that mixing was a reflection of that. In second place was the fact that the children switched so that others could understand, or for words they didn't know at the moment. And 15 said their children didn't switch with monolinguals. Also, some parents said they could understand the switches, so it didn't bother them. They wanted the children to learn both languages, and that seemed to help. And 2 said it was a matter of respect and support to not criticize their children. But one honest mother admitted, si yo lo supiera, también lo mezclaría. 2/3 of those who criticized the switching believed it will not allow them, there are only 23, it would not allow them to learn Spanish. Others worry they are damaging Spanish, that it's incorrect, that people will think them stupid, and that because their parents can't understand when the children switch to English, and that it is not correct. It turns out, in fact, that most of the parents do switch themselves. Only 26% never do. And about 20% switch a lot, mucho. And 41% have themselves been criticized for switching by other Latinos. So, do their children speak Spanish, finally? The 3 proficiency categories turned out to be almost equally divided. 33% speak it poorly, 32% speak excellent Spanish, and the remaining 35% speak it well. But the majority of the poor speakers of Spanish are under 25 years of age. The best speakers are between 26 and 40 years of age. Clearly, young children are most in danger of not becoming bilingual and of not raising bilingual children in the future. So I wonder, will California's Spanish-English bilinguals challenge or reproduce linguistic and educational inequality? Will they raise bilingual children? I think that we must center the role of power in language in our efforts to challenge powerful politicians and dismantle powerful institutions. I have long advocated what I call an anthropolitical linguistics, to focus on the power role, which demands that we reject rigid linguistic, cultural, and national boundaries, and the symbolic domination of the languages of those in power. We must recenter the focus on the strengths of the global majority, because that's what we are. We are not a minority. We are part of the global majority. And so we must also embrace different types of identities and reject elite definitions of bilinguals and value non-standard dialects and code switching. Above all, our perspective demands action and community involvement. So some of you have already organized parent workshops or dance projects that involve the community, including libraries, to dispel the myths about bilingual education, bilingual confusion, speech delays, and harmful development. To engage children in speaking Spanish, I organized weekly loteria games in one community in Solana Beach. For my loteria games, You could not win a prize if you yelled bingo. You lost. And if you were unable to say the names of each of the winning cards, you also did not win. I also asked children to collect the favorite dichos in their family and to write them down and share them with us. And I hope that someone here can help me organize a blog called Los Dichos de Mami so that Latinos from all over can contribute the ones that they can ask parents about. Above all, because California lags behind other states in bilingual education, we must advocate for extensive and intensive bilingual education. Our state history is spotty. In 1998, Proposition 227 ended bilingual programs and forced the children whose home language was Spanish, even though they spoke English, to be labeled LEP, Limited English Proficient, and in order to be recategorized as FEP, Fluent English Proficient speakers, it was very difficult because of regulations and tests. At the school where Mendoza Denton documented the strong bilingualism of the Sureñas and Norteñas, tests and grades were used to label 61% of them LEP. That word is very painful for me because I remember in New York it was transformed to lepers. In 2016, Proposition 58 passed in California and allowed non-English only education programs, but the state has not committed to inclusive elementary to college programs. Only 16% of the state are enrolled in 2019 to 20. That's 3 times lower or 2 times lower than many other places. So when the dean said that her child was enrolled in Wisconsin, look at the Wisconsin figure. Many reports document the efforts, the benefits of well-planned bilingual education, including cognitive functioning, social, emotional, and sociocultural outcomes, future employment and earnings, and psychologists, including Judith Kroll at Irvine, UC Irvine among them, are studying, quote, how minds and brains accommodate multiple languages and how that accommodation is affected by social context and comes to change the human experience. I, on a very personal level, approached this by urging everybody to give this bilingual manual as one of the gifts at every baby shower for a future Latina mother. The first version of this bilingual manual was written with the help of my Hunter College undergrads in New York. You can see, but this recent version incorporates the universal you, which I advocate as an inclusive gender marker in Spanish, instead of the X, of course, and I don't like the E because it's too Frenchy for me, and I can have this debate with you all day. I ain't gonna win. Eso sí está cierto. Pero mira esto. I had to write over this with a U. I urge you to copy the link at the bottom in blue and write your own manual for your own communities with your own students and your own neighbors. And make sure that you list the different Latino communities in the neighborhood and also list the specific local resources that bilingual children and parents can take advantage of, whether or not it's a dance class or a library, charlas, or loteria games, whatever. Very important. Here's page 2 of this, I think it's 8 or 10 little pages. And you see the English on one side and Spanish on the other side. And every page begins with a quote from one of the parents that we interviewed back then. I have to proudly say that one of the students who worked on this in 1998 is now a professor at the University of Alberta in Canada. We also urge everyone to consider celebrating on February 21st next year, International Mother Language Day in your universities, schools, libraries, and communities. February 21st was declared International Mother Language Day by UNESCO to promote linguistic and cultural diversity and multilingualism in honor of 4 young students who were killed in Bangladesh on that day in 1952 because they were protesting the imposition of Urdu on Bengali speakers. At UCSD, for the last 4 years, we have used welcome signs like this and posted welcome signs in many languages and have tape-recorded speakers around campus and in many classes. You can create videos that capture local and linguistic diversity. You can create talking benches or even talking trees, we had that at UCSD, that stream welcome messages in many languages. We also helped 4 local high schools create their own celebrations. We meet in person on campus and then via Zoom. This next year's theme is raising bilingual children. We hope you will join us with your own themes and in your own ways. This is one of the posters of the 58 languages that we recorded at UCSD, and I also interviewed Chancellor Khosla in Hindi, and he was on one of these. We have found that when students dig deep to document examples of linguistic variety, intolerance, and repercussions, they help interrupt the reproduction of inequality if they share their work with community members and the media and local organizations. Students at UCSD successfully documented language loss and revitalization, as Professor Bilingual mentioned before, and students at Swarthmore documented language and social change in Philadelphia when I was there as a visiting professor. Here are 2 flyers about recent and ongoing efforts by students in California. One PhD candidate at Stanford, Evelyn Fernandez, invites students in the flyer on the left who commute across the border to scan her QR code to participate in her PhD study. While other students at UC Irvine have conducted Spanish charlas about bilingualism for parents at a San Diego library recently. Also, I think Isaac Felix is here somewhere, and he is writing his PhD at Berkeley about the Tijuana border lines and the people who wait on those lines. Please contact them if you want to participate or start such an effort, or contact me. Finally, at the bottom right, there's a link for faculty who want to include gender diversity in their Spanish classes. Again, this will be available on the recording. Fortunately, the Society for Linguistic Anthropology has instituted a $500 Language and Social Justice in Action Award for graduate and undergraduate students, to encourage them to address a contemporary issue involving language and social justice. Please consider applying and asking your students to apply. You know this face, I'm sure. You don't know him? Anyway, I won't ask. Many Latinos, young and old, are encouraged by, quote, the growing tide of radical artists who break from the blanqueamiento vision that idealizes whiteness and proclaims a false claim of racial harmony. The Puerto Rican rapper Bad Bunny, the most streamed artist in Spotify's history, is helping Spanish achieve worldwide popularity. He records only in Spanish and speaks in Spanish on American TV programs. In Perdonen, he raps about his disgust with racism and urges youth to fight on, promising, tal vez hoy no cambiemos el mundo, pero mañana haremos la diferencia. It's my hope that with the support of young rappers and students and old profs like me, we can unmask authoritarian leaders, refute their misinformation, and dismantle the structures and policies that reproduce oppression and inequality. The role of language is critical. Of course, we know that The very uneasiness that diverse ways of speaking stirs up contributes to the strengthening of the country. And we ask you, and finally, I end by asking us to rephrase the words of Benjamin Franklin, who suggested that we not ask, what is he, but what can he do, referring to the new Americans. We must urge US Americans not to ask, what do they speak, but what do they say and do? Because that is the one way that we remind them that when they hear other languages, especially Spanish, they're reminded the American dream is not dreamt in English only. Gracias. We have time for lots of questions. Espero. Okay. Questions and comments?
We're going to get started, and in the meantime, please make use of your note cards if you have any questions you would like to ask Ana Celia. Thank you very much for your talk, Ana Celia. This was beautifully put, a lot of years of work and efforts into a 45-minute presentation is a very difficult feat. So I wanted to ask, since your earlier work in New York, reflecting on that work and moving forward to your more recent work in the San Diego-Tijuana border, what are some of the similarities that you can find, or maybe differences that you can note towards identity and attitudes towards bilingualism and Spanish use in these communities?
Esto está puesto, yeah. Well, I think that one thing is clear is that Spanglish is less of a dirty word for many people today, and that there is pride in a recognition of the bilingual skills that that represents. And they understand that we're not talking about the kind of Spanish that Peace Corps volunteers that I trained and was with for 2 years in Latin America, at the end of 2 years would say, yo, bio tiqueto Kansas volar. This is not code switching. That's not knowing the language. So that kind of knowledge is one of the big differences. But I do still see lots of children unwilling or unable to engage in Spanish. And of course, the lack of bilingual programs is a very big continuing problem. And I'm not sure if the awareness on the part of the parents has increased as to what they have to do or what they should be doing in order to maintain the bilingualism in the family. But I do think that that's why I want other people to study other communities and to see if there are specific differences.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask another question here about, it's been said and it's been shown that Spanish is maintained in communities because of newcomers, Spanish speakers that come back into the communities. And how can Latino communities in California reverse language shift from Spanish to English across these 3 generations?
Well, I think I tried to mention several ways. I think you need to do bilingual charlas with parents to explain to them what is necessary. You need to hand them specific manuals. You need to carry out activities in the local libraries and in local community centers that help with Spanish, be they poetry readings or dance groups or loteria games. So I think that is super important, but it needs to involve the parents who have seen the damaging loss and can speak to other parents about how that should be avoided. And I'm sure there are people here who are doing very important things. Anybody here doing something great or not so great to foster and to reverse this?
I created I'm not doing it anymore, but when my first child was born, I realized there weren't any story times in Spanish in the city of Santa Cruz. So I approached the library and they gave me space to run it. And I was fortunate they let me do it. And then at some point, I asked another person that would help me write grants to get books. The idea behind that program was to provide a space for parents to participate, because many times these Spanish-speaking parents, they don't have a voice inside even in a bilingual classroom, they don't have necessarily a voice.
Is everybody hearing her? No. Yeah? Más duro, sí. Yeah, but she ran a program at the local library.
Also, the idea with the grant that we got was to each child that came to our program to attend the story time went home with a book in Spanish.
Yes.
Already learned in some cases. But unfortunately, that wasn't sustainable, I was told, so we had to stop giving out books.
Yes.
And then at some point after 8 years, I got busy and I just left it, but I'm glad to know that they're still doing it, at least in one branch of the Santa Cruz Public Library.
Well, that's a tremendous contribution, very important. Un aplauso para la...
Ana Celia, we have another question that is, do you have any advice for undergrads who are wanting to take a similar academic path as you?
Well, I do hope that you will follow Bad Bunny's belief that change is possible and do something that involves language as spoken, not only looking at the structural aspects of it, but also the social and emotional aspects of what is involved when people are becoming bilingual or turning away from being bilingual. So I think that the future has lots of different possibilities for you, not only formally teaching in bilingual programs, but doing something like becoming a library worker where you promote that in the libraries. Starting TV programs that focus on this, or something that is one of those little things that children who are always on the phone looking at games will do in Spanish. All of those things are very important new ways to approach involving children in the benefits of learning and speaking Spanish. And I think you all have, all kinds of great possibilities. I know that some people have just thought when she said she did this in the library that they're going to go home and do that. How many of you are going to go home and do that in your library? No, I don't know. One, menos mal. Okay.
Some people say that one of the best strategies to maintain the mother language is to visit the homeland and see themselves that the language is used widely. What do you think about this approach, and what are your suggestions for people whose homeland is far and to those who do not have the financial resources or time to visit the homeland?
You left out the most important reason why they can't return. Because their status doesn't allow them to return. And this is the majority of the families in my community. So I think that it's always wonderful. And they do a lot via Zoom talking to, but they just say hello, adios, and then they go. So they don't have much interaction. Certainly it is invaluable to go to the country. My mother had a scare with breast cancer and prayed La Puertorriqueña to La Virgen de Guadalupe. And when everything was clear, she took me at age 8, and I have worn this all the rest of my life, because that was so moving to go to Mexico. And of course, the trips to Puerto Rico were more frequent because they were closer and more available. But, and when we were able to travel without parents, that was important. So the question is, how safe is it for you to send your children to your homeland without anybody else around? How expensive is it? But I do think that it is an extremely important effort, and that's why the programs at universities that take students back to Latin America are very important. My own life as a Peace Corps volunteer was very important, because I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Costa Rica, where I have a comadre who has 157 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And they will be celebrating my birthday for me, with me, next year. That's the third country in my life. So I think those trips are very important if they can be afforded, and if a university can help make that happen, and church groups, all the more reason.
So much of your talk focuses, rightly so, on bilingualism for L1 Spanish speakers. What about L1 English speakers, gringos? Will they be accepted by L1 Spanish communities if they learn Spanish?
Well, I think if every time I have seen Latinos meet a gringo who speaks Spanish well, or who tries, they're very welcoming and very, appreciative of the effort. So I think that that is important. It depends upon the poisonality of the person, as I say. Because I don't care what language you speak, si eres jodón, eres jodón. And we don't want you. But I do think that people are eager to share, their backgrounds and their history, and when it's respected. Respeto above all.
That's it. And we have one last question, which is, what is the intersection of immigration status, mixed, undocumented, and use of Spanish and English? How can we support undocumented students to maintain their home language?
Well, there's even a threat now that DACA will be eliminated. So even the DACA students are in danger of losing their legal aspect to be able to work here and ever. I think that, I'm not sure, the question is, how can we help the undocumented become bilingual?
Maintain the home language.
Well, I think many of them are forced to maintain their home language because that's the only one that keeps them connected to the people back home. And it depends upon how many years they're here and whether or not they marry a gringo or enter into a relationship that then stops them speaking the language. But for the most part, those are the people who are maintaining Spanish. It's their children who are, and their grandchildren rather, who are most likely to lose it. And that is, understandable. I think someone just told me, my godson just told me today on the phone that that his chef boss is a Mexican, but not really, he says to me, because he doesn't speak Spanish well, you know. So there are these people, that's really the bigger concern, are they losing their Spanish or not wanting to speak it? But I think that most of the undocumented are trying to keep their Spanish, but they're also making tremendous efforts to learn English. I was just telling these students that I'm teaching a class for the first time that I created myself for immigrants who don't know any English. And one lady showed up for the first time, for the first class, with a little tiny pad and a pencil. And she said to me, le dije a mis hijos que no puedo cenar con ellos esta noche porque tenía que estar a tiempo para esta clase, porque es la primera vez que voy a ser estudiante en mi vida. I said, yo me quedo con ella if nobody else comes. Because, you know, I also started another little group with a graduate student trying to do a more advanced class, but that's not working out apparently. But my class is going. So, and it brings me great joy, great joy. Plus the fact they bring lemons to me and que más, maracujá, a lot of good stuff.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a Ana Celia Zentella.
¿No hay más preguntas?